Thank you for being here. So our topic today, we want to talk about really a unique experience that Dr. McGuire and I had where we co-taught a teacher preparation course in instructional technology, and how that one semester experience emerged into sort of an interest in this as a research topic. And so we'll share our brief experience with that, and then some of the next steps that we're excited about. And really what we want to do today is to pick your brains about how something like this might look in your own institutions, or similar experiences you may have had, so that we can broaden out this research. Before we get started, we'll just give folks a few minutes to get in and get in the right frame of mind with a little welcome activity. There's a collaborative Google Doc for all of our work during this session. It's the same document, but these links will take you to the specific headings if you want to follow those. I believe that doc is also in the chat. This is a question I've really enjoyed putting to my teachers lately over the past couple of years. What's a remote teaching strategy from your 2020, 2021 experience that stuck with you? Maybe you've been remote and there were a lot of new ideas flying around, or you were like myself, you're a classroom teacher who was suddenly remote and had to come up with new strategies. What are sort of the greatest hits that came back to the classroom with you? One of my favorite strategies that I came across in the past couple of years was this hexagonal thinking from, I found out about it through the Cult of Pedagogy, and I've used it online and in person as a great engagement activity to get my students or my teachers thinking about things in different ways. And I just keep coming back to it. You know, it's sort of one that I can't let go of. So if there's any strategies that stick out to you like that, I'd love to hear about them. You'll find a link to the Google Doc. Maybe if you came in late, we might need to post that again, or also this document here on the QR code or the document link on the slides directly. Pat, was there anything for you? I know Cult of Pedagogy is a resource I found out about through you, and I've gotten a wealth of strategies from them. Is there anything that comes to mind for you as something from remote teaching that stuck with you this year?
Yeah, in fact, we're doing it right now. This track 0, which in a minute we'll look at our full playlist for our session for today. But track 0 is something that for my remote synchronous classes, I started doing. In fact, I do it in all of my classes, even my in-person classes. But it's really just an opportunity to build some culture, to perhaps do something fun, and it may or may not be related to the topic that we're covering that day. But I've really found, and particularly in online environments, this idea of cultivating relationships and building culture, it's not easy, and you need to be very intentional about that. And so I've incorporated this track 0 to all of my courses, and it's really the first 5-ish minutes of the class. And even if a few students sign on early, just something we can chat about that's low risk, that again, might feed into the lesson and might not. So I'm very intentional every day or every class that I teach with trying to come up with something creative for this track 0.
Great, yeah. The whole playlist model is something that I got from Pat in our co-teaching experience, and yeah, we did the same thing with our modules, which we'll describe here in a minute. That document's there for you if anyone wants to hop on and add to it as we go, but we'll go ahead and move forward. So I didn't even realize these were animated. I'm Will Cheney. I'm an instructional technology coach at Hartford Public Schools right now. I'm a father of 2, a 3- and 2-year-old who keep me busy. I like to call myself an amateur pizzaiolo. I just like to make pizza. I've got some dough going upstairs. And in the course of study that we're going to talk about today, I was the in-service co-teacher. Dr. McGuire?
Oh, thanks, Will. And so I'm Pat McGuire. I'm a professor of education, and technology and math are my two main kind of research and teaching areas. I'm actually a former high school math teacher. And so in my previous educational world, I worked as a high school math teacher. But yeah, so I'm also a father of two. Will and I have two young children, fairly close in age, so we can commiserate about different things and challenges related to COVID that we've had with our young children. In my spare time, I'm a distance runner. It's one of the main reasons I live in Colorado Springs. And I'm also the faculty instructor kind of record of the course that we're going to talk about here for this session.
Great. So we've done track 0 here where we shared a strategy, and we've done some introductions. We'll get into background and framing of the class that we taught together, the experience that we had, and the little bit of research we did with that, which left us with some early results and some really promising takeaways for further work with this. What we'd love to be the bulk of this session, though, is your turn, a discussion about how similar experiences may be going on in other places or how they could be cultivated, because we see a lot of promise in this model of bringing in-service teachers to support teacher preparation. And then finally, we'll be looking at next steps, what we like to call the so what and now what, and hopefully sending us off with some action items to try to promote this work. So we want to share and reflect on the co-teaching experience that Pat and I had, and to gather ideas for future work in this field, identifying similar or other models to compare to what we came up with, to address the barriers and limitations that came up in our study, and to consider ways that other folks might be evaluating similar experiences, because that was one of the challenges we faced. And then to promote co-teaching in your institutions and sort of broaden our sample. Pat will tell us a little bit about the course in general, and then I will dig a little deeper into how we modified that last year.
All right, well, thanks, Will. So the class we're going to be talking about today is an Intro to Technology and Education course. And I'll just give you the kind of the 30,000-foot overview. The course is really anchored in TPACK, and I think probably most folks or many folks at this conference understand what TPACK is, but just in case you don't, it's technological pedagogical content knowledge. You know, it's a mouthful, but it's really looking at the combination of kind of technical skills, teaching, and then content knowledge. We also have a strong focus on universal design for learning. And so those two ideas really do serve as the foundation for all of the course coverage. As Will mentioned, one of the things that we really try and do in this course is model best practices. So these are, pre-service teachers. It is an introductory course, so we cover a lot of top level things, just kind of technology basics. But along the way, we really do try and model good teaching and best practices. Probably one of the most important parts of the class and one of the most valuable pieces in terms of the co-teaching is this last idea. And it's the idea of linking our content we cover in the course to authentic examples and experiences. And I really feel like Will was able to provide that additional perspective. Again, I'm a former high school teacher. Former is the operative word there. And the fact that Will is an in-service teacher and working with students and other teachers kind of day to day, he was really able to bring that that last bullet kind of to bear in the course. We did link the course syllabus if you're interested in taking a peek at some of the more kind of fine print, if you will, for the course. So that's linked there as a Google Doc, and in a minute I'll share it in the chat as well in case you want to take a peek at that.
Yeah, and that link is available in the Google Doc as well as the slides. But like Pat noted, my role as the in-service teacher was really to provide an extra perspective to this last point here of linking content to practice. But I also, this was in the spring of 2021. And so I had taken this class as a graduate student in the spring of 2020 when my school went to emergency distance learning. And then we planned this experience in the fall of the following year, in the fall of 21, as I transitioned to a fully remote K-12 school, which was very new for me, going from emergency distance learning, new for everybody, to planned remote teaching. So as we sort of, all those experiences were going on, we saw an opportunity to update this class in a couple of ways with the remote teaching strategies. The way we did that, here's sort of our basic weekly playlist. Our modules would be background materials, a learning activity or two, and a learning check or quiz with periodic major assignments. There were 3 major assignments, and the goal with those was to be authentic and practical. As a current teacher, I had a strong goal for those major assignments to be something that our current teacher students could turn around and apply right to their classroom, so that there was sort of a double dipping of doing your graduate homework and also your lesson planning at the same time. And for our pre-service teachers to do some authentic lesson planning. Some of them were even freshmen or sophomores and had never really done any lesson planning. So we wanted to drive that authenticity early. But since this was our first experience doing this with the in-service teacher, there were a couple extra items that we added in. Something Pat came up with the name the Teacher's Corner. And after a couple of weeks of getting our footing, I started taking over those and just sharing each week an example or an activity from my classroom to sort of model the authentic application. And on the major assignments, I had examples of each of those from my own classroom. There was a grant writing assignment, a lesson planning assignment, and a unit planning assignment. And the feedback on all of those would be contextualized. So over time, this was just one semester, but over time, the role of myself as the in-service teacher kind of blossomed out of just the Teacher's Corner into these other areas. And that's where we see a lot of potential in iteration to sort of start from the starting line with that level of engagement that we got to after a few weeks. The Teacher's Corner, these are a couple of examples from our weeks on remote teaching. These are clickable. If you get to the slides, there are some links here that you can visit and see these in a little bit more detail. And then beneath them are just a couple of student comments from our qualitative data, where students sort of pointed out that this was a helpful element to see examples from a current classroom. We use teaching channel, we use different things, but current practice changed so much in the last couple of years that already those things seemed a little bit out of date to some of our students who were living through the transition. Some of them just coming from high school into college and suddenly being forced fully remote. They saw the tide changing for their future career in education. Pat, did we want to show the old Canvas shell at all in a screen share, or do you think we can move along?
I have it ready to go. I mean, if folks are interested, I could do a real quick 30-second flyby, but I mean, if you feel like we have enough context here, we're probably good that way as well. So up to you, Will. You make the call.
Okay. Well, if anyone, I've got the chat open here, so if anyone would like to see it, if it would be worthwhile, you can let me know, and I can pause and we can take a look at the module, the typical module. So, this idea, it began with Pat as my faculty advisor. Oops, clicked on my hyperlink there. Let's see.
Oh, and Will, while you're
Did I lose my share?
Yeah, which actually it looks like Jennifer is requesting, and at least 2 folks are requesting. So maybe if you want me to just do a quick flyby of the Canvas shell.
Sure.
Go ahead and do that.
Great.
So, can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So I suspect most of you, if not, are not using Canvas, you're aware of it. So Canvas was our platform for delivering this course. So I'm in our shell from last spring, and actually just picked week 10 because that's the week that Will showed on the Google slides. We covered remote teaching and learning that week. And so you can just kind of see here what
I can see your desktop right now, but not the web page.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm sharing the wrong screen and just blabbing away. Let me try this again. Desktop 2. How's that?
That's it.
Okay, sorry about that. So this is our Canvas shell from last spring. Like I said, week 10 was a remote teaching and learning was our content coverage for that week. And I can just kind of quickly scroll through each of the different parts of the module. And so we start with the playlist, which really just gives students the overview and kind of the key learning objectives for that week. And we use the same format each week of the course with due dates and interactive hyperlinks down here below to just kind of help guide their experience. And then they get into some of the learning activities. And so they can work through things like the call to pedagogy reading. We had an Edutopia article. We actually use this open source text to supplement our course. It's Teaching in the Digital Age, which is a great text, by the way, if you're looking for a free kind of OER text. And then each of our modules also included some reflection questions just to kind of guide students' thinking as they work through the materials. So then looks like this week we also did an NSQ standard where we had them kind of do an audit of their own ability to kind of engage in online pedagogy, which I know is somewhat hypothetical for pre-service teachers, but felt like it was a good exercise to at least get them into the standards and start thinking about what these things might look like in their classroom. We also, here's the teacher's corner that Will shared. And this image here is actually not working because I think Will was the one who uploaded it, and when he lost Canvas access, we lost that. But this kind of just gives you a sense of what these different modules look like to our students. Each week or most weeks, we also did a bonus track, which just gave students an opportunity to dig deeper. So we cited John Spencer's work in this module, which is another great resource if you're not familiar. I know Will leverages this a lot in his in-service courses. And then last but not least, let's see, there was a discussion for this week.
So these broken links, like Pat said, after I graduated, I lost my Canvas access, but those things are linked on the, they were transferred over to my personal drive. And so through the slides or the Google Doc, you can get to those resources.
And real quick, I'll show them. Yeah, thanks, Will. Real quick, I'll show them the learning check. So I think almost every week, except for maybe one or two, we had these little 25-point learning checks that just really just covered the main ideas from each module. And so, students work through these. And most of the learning checks had some combination of kind of, multiple choice, true, false type questions. But then we almost always provided an opportunity for them to create something. We found that creation is really the best way for them to demonstrate what they know. But it also was a good opportunity for us to really kind of see where students were, right? So most, not all, but most of the learning checks were tied back to the teacher's corners. And so in this case, they had two options to either create a product or do a thought experiment related to the content coverage from that week.
I'll point out again there, if you can go back up to that, where there are the two options. We're differentiating for pre-service teachers who have never taught in a classroom, undergraduate college students mostly. And we had 4 or 5 current in-service teachers. So we wanted to give them the opportunity, like I said, to double dip and just, apply what we were talking about to that week's lesson plan and send that to us. So that it didn't feel, this was from my perspective as a current graduate student and in-service teacher, wherever I could double dip and minimize my overall workload, I found that really helpful. And I think we got good feedback on that as well.
Awesome. So while we're in Canvas, is there anything else that we want to take a peek at? Is that helpful to just see a quick flyby of the structure?
maybe one of the major assignments, or just
Sure.
to see the three of them beside each other.
Let me pop into down here. These are the three major assignments. We had the first one was an ed tech tutorial,
Right.
and so we had our students pick. Really, it was up to them to choose some sort of application or website or resource, something like Kahoot or quizzes. And then they had to actually design a tutorial to teach other people about that resource. So some of them, did a screencast, others just did Google Slides or something like that. But we found a lot of utility in that assignment because they had to identify something they thought was useful and then, create some sort of presentation to teach others. Our second assignment was a classroom tech grant proposal. And before COVID, this was actually linked to the InEd Colorado grant proposal. If folks here are familiar with InEd Colorado, they previously had, I think it was up to $5,000 a grant opportunity for teachers. And so we structured this assignment closely to the InEd Colorado call for proposals, just to get our students, a chance to think about what makes a good grant proposal, right? Like, how do I articulate my goals and think about the budget? And so this was our second major assignment. And last but not least was a tech enhanced lesson plan that kind of tied together all of the different content we covered throughout the semester. We had them revisit the ISTE standards and TPACK, and really hopefully design something that they could either use that semester if they were in the classroom or even student teaching, or if not, something they could use down the road. So yeah, we had the weekly learning checks, and then these three major assignments really constituted the graded activities for the semester.
And all of these, like we said, were anchored in frameworks of universal design for learning. So picking tools that are going to make your lessons more accessible, but also TPACK, where we want our teaching students thinking about the utility of that technology and how you notice it's technology enhanced lesson plan, not just a lesson plan with flashy technology. So to justify the use of their technology and how it was going to enhance the pedagogy and the content.
All right, I think I'll probably turn it back over to you, Will. And if we want to pop back in here later, we can, but I'll go ahead and stop my share.
Sure. So this really started as, Pat, in addition to being my professor and a mentor, was my advisor. And I reached out because a class, I had a gap in my schedule, and he suggested maybe an independent study and teaching assistant experience on this class. It was as that collaboration went forward that we started to see some potential for research in here. And so we started with a question of what value is added to this kind of course by including an in-service co-teacher. It was a little bit tricky maybe to distinguish between just self-evaluating and looking at this as a model. But we had one other example of an in-service co-teacher on this same class, the same syllabus, although that section was a district cohort. It was all in-service teachers in that class, and it was spread over a full year instead of just a semester, with some in-person opportunities. So that was a little bit different than the model that we had, and made comparison just a little bit tricky. But literature, of course, gives very clear support for co-teaching in general. As expected, most of that literature is about special education co-teaching, but there are some interesting examples out there of interdisciplinary co-teaching, and just a few very limited examples that I was able to find of in-service teachers working with university faculty. One of the best, most aligned examples was actually a paper that Pat had done with Steve Ottmer over the several semesters prior to that. And then, of course, there's plenty of literature supporting the idea that TPACK is best supported by practical examples and application in teacher preparation. And a term that we borrowed was linkage, which is the ability of teaching students to link the theory to the application in class. And that became, over time, that really became my focal point for my work in this class. Pat, did you want to talk about your experience with Steve a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I can mention, so one of my colleagues, Steve Ottmer, who is an in-service high school science teacher in Colorado Springs, he and I had actually taught multiple semesters together, not in this technology class, but in another class called Classroom Interactions. And so it was also with pre-service teachers. And so Steve and I just kind of randomly started working together. I don't even remember the backstory of how that started, but we immediately realized that, wow, there's so much potential for this model to have, an in-service teacher working alongside a university faculty member. And so just we clicked, we had great chemistry. We ended up teaching, I think, 7 or 8 semesters of this course together. We organized field trips to his classroom, and it was just a great experience. And so kind of at the end of that, we decided to do some retroactive analysis of our FCQ, or faculty course questionnaires, the required student surveys at the end of the semester. And so we compared different sections of this course to this model where Steve and I taught together versus sections that were not co-taught. And we found pretty significant differences in student satisfaction and student learning outcomes. And so that really planted the seed. So the work I did with Steve over several years for this model to kind of emerge with Will and I. So.
Yeah, the paper or the chapter that Pat and Steve put together really helped me hone in this research question and sort of focus my efforts as this became my master's project. Our sample, though, was a bit more muddled than Pat and Steve enjoyed with several semesters, and it's one of the reasons we really want to expand this research further. We were able to compare the FCQ, the faculty course questionnaire scores, which was sort of our most solid common quantitative data point, across 3 groups. This was a total of 9 semesters or sections. I think it was 9 sections over 7 semesters. So there were the solo instructor sections. There were 7 of those, and that included 3 different instructors, including Pat and the instructor who co-taught 1, which I had mentioned was the district cohort program. That was a group of teachers from one district who expanded this course over a full year and had some in-person opportunities. And then there was our co-taught course. We found, really limited statistically significant variance among the 3 groups. And what we did find was kind of surprising. We saw that the co-taught courses actually scored lower in the areas where we expected some benefit, which was encouraging interest. The instructor encourages interest in the topic and respect and professional treatment. And we actually scored highest in effective communication, which we anecdotally saw as a potential pitfall of the model, because there were a couple instances where I would field an email or Pat would field an email, and we might contradict each other on little differences in our expectations for an assignment. Qualitative results were an even more limited sample. We only had student comments from Pat's sections in the available data. So that was FCQ comments, student surveys that we did with our group, and interviews that I conducted with a couple of students after the fact, and then a faculty focus group with those 3 faculty members. And in that data, we found positive trends, positive comments regarding encouraging interest in our students, providing support, and driving that linkage in TPACK. And students did actually note in a couple of cases drawbacks in communication, which we expected, but also workload. They perceived an increased workload, which I think is fair. We added in the teacher's corner and some elements to our playlist that possibly, while I think the linkage was valuable, there could have been maybe some calibration of the workload there for the students. So these pointed to us to some promising benefits. The examples and contexts were highly rated by students from the teachers' corners and the major assignments. Also, worth discussing is the benefits to the instructors. This is something that wouldn't be reflected in student questionnaires, but in our faculty focus group, we talked a lot about how opportunities like this are great for professional development and linkage for the instructors. For me as a current teacher to really dig into the educational theory, and the best way to learn something is to teach it. And so to really dig into it that way was great PD for me. And I think for Dr. McGuire and Dr. Kupferman as well, who had done this, sort of linking their theoretical expertise to the current moment of teaching, was helpful. We saw a lot of opportunity for growth in this, and this is where we really want to go from here. We think at a larger scale, with recruitment and training for the in-service teacher, some of those kinks could be worked out. Things like the increased workload or some of the challenges in communication. This was pretty informal at first. That Pat just threw me a bone and gave me this assistant opportunity. But I could see something like this being really exciting on a broader scale, where in-service teachers can be recruited, or districts can partner with the university to make this a program, but that would likely require some sort of compensation. I got a course credit for this, which is something I needed, but depending on teacher situations, it might be a CEU like that, or it might be a stipend in order to expand this. And then that would also allow for iterative evaluation and improvements over time. So in the interest of growth, we'd love to hear if you have a co-teaching model or something similar in your program or institution, we'd love to hear about it, or to do the thought experiment and think about what could something like this look like. What barriers or limitations might you face if you wanted to get something like this off the ground? Would you start with something more informal like we did, where Pat sort of tapped me for this opportunity? Or would you look into recruiting and working directly with the district? And then really importantly to me, how would you assess the success of the model? How are you going to distinguish student satisfaction with the course overall and things like the workload or communication from what you're targeting, which in our case was TPACK, or linkage of the concepts to practice? How might you go about that? We have a pretty small group here, so if we want to keep this local here on the chat, I think that's fine, but we do have the Google Doc if it's helpful to organize your thoughts in that way. And if there's any clarifying questions, by all means. I've been turning these ideas over in my head for about a year now, and so I tend to just kind of spit it all out there. But if I can clarify anything, please let me know.
Yeah, Will, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and Jennifer mentioned,
yeah, I see this.
It's exciting, I agree, but it's also a limitation is time. So yeah, we noted that in 2A, but it's worth noting again that and Will, so the fact that this class that we co-taught was asynchronous, I think helped with some of that. The class that I taught with Steve Ottmer that we talked about earlier was actually a synchronous class. So that class was from 4:45 to 7:20 p.m., which, as you can imagine, was intentional because Steve just headed right to campus after his teaching day was over. But yeah, timing and time, I guess both of those are slightly different but related. And Will and I, we kind of figured out the co-planning part, which we really didn't talk much about, but that was a big piece of our, I think, of the success of this model, and the one that I worked on with Steve. Co-teaching is one thing, but it's only as good as the co-planning that happens behind the scenes. And so we had to be pretty strategic with trying to we met weekly, I think, Will, at least,
At
just to
least
kind of
weekly.
check in and, you know, go over things. But yeah, the time constraints is probably the biggest barrier, even more so than the money, because if
We
you
got
can't
it. We
figure
got
that
a few
out.
weeks ahead in planning, and then we would meet once a week to dig into the next week, and then usually like a 15-20 minute meeting before releasing the module. Maggie asks, how did you divide responsibilities? And that's definitely something that evolved over time. I think that's an area where with more iteration, it would be more concrete. We started planning together, co-planning 2 or 3 weeks before the semester. And at that point, you know, Pat had a shell. He's taught the course several times before. And I was looking for ways to insert myself where I could. Over time, it developed into more clear-cut divisions of responsibility. I would do the teacher's corner. I did a lot of the feedback on assignments, particularly major assignments, because we wanted to anchor those in context. So I'd sort of, you know, oh, if I was going to use this in my classroom, here's some things I would want to see in your tutorial, things like that. And then we do announcements, sort of a newsletter each week to share, where we would fill in on the draft, the pieces that we had worked on. But I do think that's maybe where the students perceived an increased workload. If we're both contributing to an announcement or newsletter, if we're both writing learning activities or teaching corners, you know, if you had 2 teachers lesson planning for a class, it's easy to exceed your 55-minute class on that lesson plan. And in an asynchronous course, maybe it's difficult to gauge how much content you're putting out there. So we did get some feedback on that I think could be fine-tuned with iteration. Jennifer says, I would want to use the EEE framework with a focus on the ISTE standards and new state tech standards. ISTE standards were very present in our course, but yeah, it could help to have some frameworks to drill that down and model that work. As for the time, to go back to Jennifer's point, we were in a unique spot here where I was, you know, right in the midst of my graduate program. So this took the place of what would have been a 3rd class in my schedule. So I had sort of already accounted for that time. I'd say it was more time and effort to co-teach the class than it was to take the class. And so that's a consideration. It's an undertaking. But I was also teaching in a mostly asynchronous remote online school at the time. So I wasn't constrained by the teacher schedule, and that would make this more challenging. I mean, a lot of that work would have to take place outside of your regular teaching contract hours, which is where like the Scott Kupferman, who taught with the district cohort, had a little bit more district support, but even he noted that district support would be required to scale this, something like an additional prep period or some time in the week where you're compensated per your teacher contract to participate in this. But that requires some buy-in by the district for sure.
Hey, Will, I was just thinking in terms of that too, because it's a class substitution. I can see, I'm just trying to think with our master's teachers how this could be possible, but going forward, you're right. Scaling would definitely have to be that idea of a partnership between the EPP and a district or a group of districts to get this done.
Absolutely. You know, it would have to, something would have to give, right? Because teachers are spread so thin. And so if this made up the professional development requirements for that teacher for a semester or something like that, you would have to have that sort of outside support.
Yeah, and incidentally, I've also explored potential funding opportunities for this kind of co-teaching model, not specifically for this class. I'd actually written a grant prior to this work, which really focused on the idea of boundary crossing. And boundary crossing is just really thinking about how institutes of higher education and K-12 school districts, we work together a lot, but often that work is done kind of in our own lanes. And so this idea of boundary crossing is really working more collaboratively. And so I think there are opportunities, if we can have some pilot data to demonstrate that these models are successful, they're not terribly expensive. If and I should note that we had 47 or 48 students in this section, Will?
It was a pretty big
large
section, but it was overwhelmingly undergraduate, which was interesting because in the year prior when I took the course, it was closer to half and half. I don't think quite half and half, but there were more in-service teachers.
Yep.
But one interesting point we haven't talked about, it's less relevant to the research, but it was just interesting. This is a technology and education course. And there was so much demand for learning and professional development in technology in 2021. But at the same time, teachers were spread so thin that it's interesting, in-service enrollment or enrollment in general declined that year, hadn't it? Because people just didn't have the capacity to take on another course.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but so we technically combined two sections of this class, and that's why our enrollment was closer to 50 instead of 25. And so I think if folks are going to explore a co-teaching model, one of the first questions that administration will ask is, well, how do we fund this, right? That's expensive. And if you're able to, essentially just double the enrollment, but maintain the same student to faculty ratio, that was kind of a workaround, and that potentially would be an easy way to sell this to administration, because that could be a barrier. But yeah, also, like I said, looking for funding to see if this is something that is scalable. I probably would want to have that funding in place before we really tried to partner with, multiple courses or districts or something like that.
Well, as we approach the end of our time, our sort of so what, now what, I'd love to hear about anyone trying something similar. So if you feel so inclined to dip your toes into the water of co-teaching with an in-service teacher, share it with us. We're looking to broaden our sample. I think I sort of blew by it, but this was my master's project. We sort of refined it and co-wrote a paper that's under review at CITE, Contemporary Issues in Teacher Education, right now. But it's got that very limited sample. So I'd love to broaden the sample to provide more justification for the funding and scaling that we're talking about. You can find our contact information on the doc or on the slides. And then if you would, before you go, complete the tweet. One idea you might try in your own course. And then this I stole from the keynote this morning was the muddiest point this session. I think that's good feedback. The muddiest point this session was, if you could share a comment there or any other comments you have, we'd love to hear your feedback. Because this is work we want to continue to pursue. I think this idea has a lot of potential value.
Excellent. And Will, and I always point this out in any session I do. We're happy to share any of the materials that if we did a flyby of something and it piqued your interest. I know one of the reasons I go to sessions and conferences is to steal good ideas and also to literally steal stuff from people. And so we're happy to help facilitate that stealing. So,
yeah, one of our big focal points in the course was OER, and I think we're both proponents of that. And I'm happy to share, anything I put together for this course, I'm happy to make available open. Good, Jennifer. Jen says we've activated her brain. I'm glad to hear that. So if you feel inclined to complete the tweet for us, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I think we're all set. Here's some of the key references that were mentioned in this slideshow. I referred to some of the literature we drew on. You can also find Pat and Steve's paper here, their chapter, and those references, and then our contact information again here at the end for you if anyone would like it. And thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks,
Great,
everyone.
Maggie, thank you.
Don't forget to fill out your surveys at the conference site as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.